With the holiday of Sukkot only days away, how much of our drinking is meant to take place inside of the sukkah, and how much can we get away with drinking outside of the sukkah? That's something we're going to be discussing in this episode of
the Jewish Drinking Show, bringing L'chaim to life.
L'chaim.
So I threw in text number 1 here. It's just the biblical verse, actually verses. Okay, it's there. Text number 2, I have a variety of Tannaitic stuff here. Text number 2 is you sit in your sukkah, you drink in your sukkah, and you hang out and you bring your vessels, okay? And this is something we're going to see a whole bunch, that part of the, what's the whole deal with actual Sukkot? You're eating, you're drinking, you're sleeping, you're spending time there. Text number 3, that you are really supposed to be doing all these things within inside the sukkah, but you can eat and drink casually outside of the sukkah. So the Hebrew is actually arai, that you're allowed to do this outside of the sukkah casually. There's a really fascinating set of incidents that happened in text number 4. They brought a cooked dish to Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai and also to Rabban Gamliel. There was also a bucket of water, so there's a drinking thing. And they said, take him up to the sukkah. Clearly, the inference is that even though they did not need to, they still nevertheless asked for them. Now, also, are they themselves bringing them up? No, they had other people fetch them. It's a lot easier to eat in the sukkah or drink in the sukkah when you don't have to, and when other people can bring the stuff to you. It's a lot easier. That's nevertheless, but for Rabbi Tzadok, he didn't bother. He just ate outside of the sukkah, and that's fine. These were above and beyond. They did not have to, but they went above and beyond. I do try to make my translations to be pretty gender neutral. Here, however, so one of the things here is that women are exempt from the sukkah. So a lot of these conversations are going to be really more, I guess, more masculine. Are men really required to do these things? However, I will make a very clear point that doesn't mean that women do not get points for accomplishing these things in a sukkah. So the matter of what does one have to, does one not, are generally going to be more masculine gendered, but it can go, the obligation is more upon the men, but doesn't mean that women doesn't count. Text 6, there's another one. So this is another formulation. This is our final Mishnah that I'm bringing here. Is all 7 days a person renders the sukkah their permanent residence and their house temporary. And then you just mentioned rain. So if rain fell, when are you permitted to get out? When congealed dishes will spoil. Okay, I'm not going to get into this. I do want to point something out. This is an interesting parable that appears in the Mishnah. There are not many parables that occur throughout the entirety of the Mishnah. This is a really interesting one. To what is this matter comparable? It's to a servant who comes to mix a cup of wine for his master, and he pours a jug of water in his face. There's lots of things that come up in the conversation. Who's who? But who's who? The Gemara actually asks, who's who in this parable? Like, which one is God and which one is the Jewish people? But I first want to point out, I actually changed something in the translation. The translation actually said they come to pour a cup of wine for their master and they end up spilling water. But that's not actually how. Who pours? That's what well, before I get into before I get to the parable piece, I want to point out that specifically they are bringing water because back in those times they lived in a Greco-Roman society and they always mixed their wine. They diluted it, so they always cut their wine. So this person isn't coming to pour wine, they're coming to pour water. Now, ultimately, what the Bavli says, I did not actually look into what the Yerushalmi says, what the Bavli says, it's God basically pouring the water on the Jew's faces, I guess. It's also fascinating to consider that's all Israel. Like, that's in Israel. This is not a typical time of rain in Israel for Sukkot. Ohio is a totally different situation. A couple other, and these are very significant Braitot, early Tannaitic texts. Text number 7 is the sages taught all 7 days a person renders their sukkah permanent, house temporary. We saw this language in the Mishnah. Also, if they have beautiful vessels, takes them up to the sukkah. If he has beautiful bedding, he takes it up to the sukkah. He eats and drinks and relaxes in the sukkah. These 3 activities, right? Eating, drinking, relaxing. These are 3 very explicit, specific activities. In what is this teshvu that we saw in text number 1, if you want to see the broader literary context, as you dwell, ke'ein taduru, just as you live, just as you dwell. From here, they said all 7 days a person renders his sukkah permanent and his house temporary. How so? This is very similar to the previous text, even though they are different texts, they are very similar. It takes it up to the sukkah. He eats, he drinks, he relaxes in the sukkah, and studies Torah in the sukkah. So they are 4 activities here, right? So 4 activities: eating, drinking, relaxing, lounging, and then learning Torah. So whether it's 3 activities, 4 activities, but the thing I want you all to come away with is that drinking is one of the primary activities that one is supposed to execute in the sukkah. There could be other Tannaitic early rabbinic texts that discuss drinking, other activities in the sukkah, but these are the key significant ones. And I will also tell you that especially 7 and 8 are extremely important to know going forward. There were not many Amoraic texts that really discuss drinking. It's fascinating. When the Gemara takes up the Mishnah stuff here, especially in text 3 and 4, with that, they go into eating. So the Gemara delves into eating. What are the parameters? What constitutes, because like any good reader, what is this arai business? What is this casual eating business? So even though they talk about casually eating, casually drinking, the Gemara is only concerned about quantifying the casual eating, but it does not delve into the casual drinking, which is interesting. I would just leave it on the table, but the Gemara does not go into it. The only significant Amoraic text that actually discusses in any way drinking is that of text 9. Whom else but the Bavli's biggest wine drinker, Rava himself. And he says, you know what, you should bring up your drinking vessels to the sukkah. Eating vessels, bringing all that stuff. But anyway, so he is an advocate, even though we actually saw already in Tannaitic text that you should bring, where was it? Especially texts in 7 and 8, you should bring your vessels up, but maybe it's just your plates, your utensils. Okay, but he very explicitly says you bring up your drinking ware, right? Sukkah is where drinking happens. It should not be your house. You should be drinking inside your sukkah. That's what the sukkah is there for. He also talks about eating also, fine, but now we're going to get into the medieval stuff. Now, Maimonides is important. Rambam's important. I'm not the biggest Maimonides fan. However, most of my stuff actually is focused on Maimonides here. So I don't want anybody to think I'm just fanboying on Maimonides, but I think it's important to consider what he writes.
How must the mitzvah of dwelling in the sukkah be fulfilled? A person must eat, drink, and live in the sukkah throughout all 7 days of the festival, both during the day and at night, in the same manner as he dwells in his home throughout the year. During these 7 days, he must consider his house as a temporary dwelling, and the sukkah as his permanent home. As it says in Berurah, you shall dwell in the sukkah for 7 days. What does this imply? His attractive utensils and attractive bedding should be brought to the sukkah. His drinking utensils, i.e. his cups and crystal pitchers, should be brought to the sukkah. However, utensils used for food, pans, and plates can be left outside the sukkah. A candelabra should be brought to the sukkah. However, if the sukkah is small, it should be left outside the sukkah. Basically, move in.
Yeah, that's a good description. Yeah, and he really just ratifies what we saw in the Gemara pieces, right?
We should eat, drink, and sleep in the sukkah for the entire 7 days of the festival, both during the day and at night. It is forbidden to eat a meal outside the sukkah for the entire 7-day period. However, there is no prohibition of wanting to snack the measure of kvetza or less, or even slightly more. One may not sleep outside the sukkah at all, even a brief nap. It is permissible to drink water and eat fruit outside the sukkah. However, a person who follows the stringency of not drinking even water outside the sukkah is worthy of praise.
All right, thank you. So now I'm going to pause, because even though in the Talmudic stuff we saw that, eating and drinking are meant to take place in the sukkah, however, casual eating and drinking are permitted outside of the sukkah. What constitutes casual drinking or non-casual drinking? Also, are there different beverages that might be different? Just like food. So they talk about fruits. So, and this is a great articulation by Maimonides, which is fruits and water are the most casual eating. Objectively, no one has just sits down and eats fruit or drinks water. No one does that in an organized and set fashion. It's a casual. It's a snack. Right. And water, no one sits down to drink water. No, that's not what people do. What you do instead is, now, totally differently, what's the opposite end? What?
Bread.
Right. So bread. Right. So I'm also thinking back to Mishnah Brachot in the 6th chapter of Mishnah Brachot, which is that Wine and bread are the only consumptives that we have that have specifically designated blessings for them. Bread gets its own, wine gets its own, right? So why not here also? We have bread that it necessitates eating within inside the sukkah. What about wine? Now, we have not seen anybody talk about wine so far. Wine has gone totally unremarked upon. It's not because no one drank wine. They definitely drink wine. But clearly water is something that's always casual. But what about everything else?
Only drink water outside of the
Great question. So far it's rather unclear. That's a perfect question, something we're gonna keep with us as we move along, which is no one's talked about wine so far, only water. When we only can think about beverages specifically, water and fruits are the only ones that get an automatic pass. And we assume bread, although actually something that's a little bit unclear is something we saw earlier is that actually if you have less than an egg's worth of bread, that's actually casual eating. But once you have a quantitative minimum, then it automatically pushes into you're now having a set fixed meal. When you enter your sukkah, you say the blessing. Okay. The thing that I really just want to highlight is you say all these blessings on a cup. Now, that's really all I wanted to point out about that. That's not actually more broadly significant, but you know what? That is also Jewish drinking, right? When you say Kiddush, when you say these blessings in the sukkah, that's also Jewish drinking. And you do it over, I mean, he just said it all at coast, but he really means, as the translation said, on wine.
Hey there, I wanted to break in. I hope you're enjoying this episode so far. I want to give you a sneak peek into our next episode about the first brewery in Jerusalem.
This perception of beer being what you get drunk on is being actively combated by the world of craft beer. The craft beer is making the argument that this is a culinary product.
I hope you enjoyed that sneak peek into our next episode. Please note, it's not our next week's episode. We're going to be taking a few weeks off, 2 weeks off for the holidays. So this will be coming out in 3 weeks. All right, now back into this episode.
So this is text number 13. He just quotes a bunch of stuff in this first paragraph that we've already seen in the Gemara stuff.
What text you read?
Text 13. And he said, then he quotes from Rambam, you're allowed to drink water outside and also eat fruits outside of the sukkah. One who behaves strictly so as not to drink water, even water outside of the sukkah, should have blessing come to him. My father, Rabbi Asher ben Yechiel, blessed memory, wrote that even if you were to say that fruits and cheeses require eating within a sukkah, that is specifically one who sets to eat upon them. By the way, I only translated this today, so it's not perfect, but one who eats them casually definitely does not need to eat them within a sukkah. And now this is a very, well, I don't know if anybody else calls it this. I am very specifically calling this line out as being controversial. Drinking wine is also a casual act of consumption. I mean, obviously, Jews are Jews. Everybody's going to disagree, but I definitely disagree. Okay. However, since we do not typically establish our consumption upon them, even one who sets upon his meal upon them is not considered a set meal, since it is not superior over that of casually eating bread, which does not require eating within a sukkah. He means with if it's less than a kibetza, less than an egg's worth. But one who sets their meal upon a dish made from one of the 5 grains is considered a set meal, requires eating within a sukkah. Okay, so I'm going to pause here. I'm not done with this. I'm going to pause here. So this is consumptive activities. What's casual? What's fixed? Food, beverages. I'm not going to go really into the food. It's hard to ignore the food. But within the beverage consumption area, everybody agrees that water, and he quotes Rambam, we just read, water's fine outside of the sukkah. He's really quoting his father saying, yeah, wine drinking is just casual. Now, the thing that I'm going to inject here is how much of this is like a cultural thing. Maybe in his time in Europe, although he went from like Franco-Germany area to Spain, but how much of this is culturally determined? Like in Talmudic times, I don't know that they were casually drinking wine, but maybe in his time they would more. I don't know. This is a very strange assertion. Okay. I'm going to continue. One blesses upon the sukkah each and every time one enters a sukkah, even if one is entering his friend's sukkah to visit him. That is to say that each and every time one enters into a sukkah, even though one blesses upon it the first day, when one returns, one blesses upon it. Such has the Gaonim written that one needs to bless upon the sukkah each and every time entering a sukkah. I will point out, so in the Gemara, it's not really, basically, the Tannaitic set up that you only make the blessing when you build your sukkah. or maybe the first time you entered or something like that. But then the later Amoraim, finally by the 5th or 6th generation of Amoraim, say, you know what, just hold off on the blessing until you say Kiddush. And that basically becomes the practice. But then the Gaonim create a new thing. Why are you waiting? If you can already push off this blessing of Leishei Basukah to once you're making Kiddush and not when you like actually build it, well, maybe we should just say this blessing every single time you go into a sukkah. You go into your friend's sukkah, say a blessing. You go to another friend's sukkah, say a blessing. You could say 100 blessings a day of just Leishei Basukah, according to the Gaonim. And he quotes the Gaonim here. So then he quotes Rabbeinu Tam, explaining that since the foundational aspect of fixedness that a person does inside their house is eating, one blesses upon food, and that covers, I'm not going to go into the rest of it. Basically, the food eating covers everything else. So this is really Rabbeinu Tam pushing back upon the Gaonic, not, bless you, the Gaonic Chiddush, novelty, if you will. So in the Gemara times, it really was you build the sukkah, you make Leishei Basukah. That's really the only time you ever say it in the Tanaim. Later, Amoraim then say, why don't you just hold off until you say Kiddush during the festival, and then you say Leishei Basukah. The Gaonim expand it radically every single time you go in. You could just literally pop your head and say hello, make a Leishei, and move on with your life. Rabbeinu Tam pushes heavily back, and he is a foundational anchor of Ashkenazi practice, which is to say, he says, it's when you're eating. That is the main thing that we do. Yeah, we sleep, and yeah, fine. But eating is important, and that's really the only time we need to say it. So that is sort of the medieval stuff.
So what's the basis? I mean, why does he say, where does he come out, where does he come to say that it's casual or not?
I think he looks around at the culture, and that his experience, his human experience is wine drinking is a casual activity. Probably within his own socio-cultural milieu, I imagine. He doesn't provide a textual reasoning.
Why is it not
I'm going to let you hold on that question. We're not solving it now, and we'll come back up again. Just like Hannah's question, your question will also pop back up. I want to quickly do text 14 is just like we saw Maimonides talking about. This is how we behave. We do these things. Okay. Text 14. So this is basically like the first text of Maimonides we saw. Nothing crazy, right? You eat, you drink, you sleep, you lounge, you reside in the sukkah all 7 days. Okay. But again, drinking is one of those activities that are intended for the sukkah. We saw this in Tannaitic text. We saw this in Maimonides. We saw this in the Torah. We see this very explicitly articulated in Shulḥan Arukh. This is a fitting activity to be accomplished, but we have seen water is exempted. And then we also see the quotation basically of Rava, you bring your drinking vessels, such as glass cups and mugs in the sukkah. You want to drink? Do it in the sukkah. How do you drink? With glasses. So bring them in the sukkah. Have your drinking in the sukkah. Text 15 is significant only in the sense that you shouldn't. There are things that are forbidden from doing in the sukkah, but that drinking is not one of those things, right? So drinking is.
It doesn't say what it is.
I mean, it's a whole separate thing. I really years ago wanted to do a whole range of topics, gamify what you can and cannot do, what you should and should not do in Sukkot, and what you can get away with outside of Sukkot. So there's a whole bunch of things, but like I'll just give you Rashi Prakim. One is doing dishes. You're not really supposed to wash your dishes inside a sukkah. You're also not supposed to pee or defecate inside of the sukkah. You're also not supposed to have sex inside of the sukkah. So there's a whole bunch of activities that you're not, like, I'm sure these in the commentaries for text 15, whole range of activities you're not supposed to do. But I think the doing the dishes is the unexpected one. But anyways, the whole point is there are a bunch of activities that are not supposed to be done inside the sukkah, but drinking is very much expected inside the sukkah.
We eat and drink and sleep in the sukkah all 7 days, both day and night, and we do not sleep outside of the sukkah, even a very short sleep. But one may eat insubstantial meal outside of the sukkah. And how much is an insubstantial meal? Approximately an egg's worth of a loaf of bread, and is permitted to drink water and wine and eat fruit, even if he made it his meal, own opinion, outside of the sukkah. And he who is stringent upon himself and will not drink even water outside of the sukkah, he is praised. In a dish made of 5 species of grain, if he makes his meal, it is considered a proper meal and required in the sukkah.
Okay, what radical word is here? Wine. That's radical. Now, Now, we saw where it came from. It came from the Torah, who quoted his father, right? But at the same time, no one had, aside from the Torah and his father, no one had previously exempted wine. Now he is saying wine also, there is no beverage that you are fully obligated to drink inside of a sukkah.
Is it possible that we're agreeing, sort of moving in and all that kind of stuff, but the wine part and the other drinking part and things like that, those can be time sensitive. So if you live in a place and you live at a time where a spirit is something you drink before a meal, that's not considered a meal. If a glass of wine goes with just by itself as a casual glass, fine. But if you're living at a time where wine is your main liquid during a meal, you'd be expected to only eat drink in a sukkah.
Yeah, I think there's a certain sense of cultural contingency going along with it. Yes. I will also very, very clearly point out, this is not debated. This is a spoiler, sort of a foreshadowing. I'm sorry, it's foreshadowing. It's foreshadowing. In addition to the many and plentiful resources that exist on JewishDrinking.com, whether it's secondary literature, fascinating insights, in addition to the really cool podcast, The Jewish Drinking Show, did you know that you can also provide interesting opportunities for your synagogue, JCC organization? And yes, that's me, bringing Rabbi Drew to help bring l'chaims to life, whether beer in the Bible, whether it's various Talmudic drinking stories, and more. I'm happy to chat, to talk to you, talk to your synagogue, your organization, your JCC, whatever it is. Feel free to reach out to me at drew@jewishdrinking.com and see how we can bring l'chaims to life. The only thing I want to point out from texts 18 and 19, this is the one point where rain comes back in. The only point is really at the bottom of text 19, that if it's raining on the whole thing, if it's the first night, you still have to do Kiddush in the sukkah, so you can say Shechianu. Okay, fine, you move on with your life and you go back inside. But that's a drinking thing. I didn't really want to focus on it, but it's still drinking in sukkahs. It's, yeah, fine, but that's drinking. So something that people have mentioned, 20, I will quickly mention 20, which is Rabbi Cairo writes, we're accustomed to only bless in the sukkah at the time of eating, and then Rabbi Yislis very clearly and very simply in 21, he writes two words, V'hachi nahog. This is how we're accustomed. This is what we do. And clearly we can trace this back to what we saw, the Torah quoting Rabbeinu Tam saying, you know what? Ashkenazi practice, eating is really the main thing that we do that triggers the blessing. It's not the Gaonek every single time you hop into a sukkah. It's more the Ashkenazi post-Gaonek, hey, only when we're eating, and specifically, I'm not going to go into all of this, but basically anything from the 5 grains, whether it's a cooked dish or bread, that really is all that seemingly, a little bit of foreshadowing, seemingly triggers the blessing and nothing else, seemingly.
Why does the OG of beverages, that you say Bori Priya Kaplan, and that can include all of your further drinks?
Yeah.
Now that we're accepting wine, so then drink anything outside.
That would, according to the Shulḥan Arukh and also the Torah and his father, that would seem to be. I'm not saying everybody agrees with that, and certainly what we're about to read, that is definitely not necessarily. That's right.
Another question about
absolutely
meals, right?
Yes.
So the 5 grains you've got to eat in the sukkah.
Yeah.
Right, you got to eat in the sukkah.
Yeah.
If you want to have a steak,
eggs work.
If you want to have a steak, and you want to have potatoes or French fries, steak and French fries, you can eat anywhere. Seemingly,
yeah. Hey there, I wanted to break in. I hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Actually, I hope you're enjoying all of the episodes, or at the very least, most of them. And if you haven't, and if this is your first episode, go check more of them out. But if you have been enjoying them, and if you enjoy the other resources that are shared at JewishDrinking.com, I hope you think about the opportunity of supporting the work that we do here and continue to do. Please feel free to visit JewishDrinking.com/donate, and you can help support the work and continue our mission and our vision of bringing l'chaims to life. Thank you so much, and now back into the show. I've done some foreshadowing. I will let you know that none of these texts were translated, and I have done some translating. So I translated most of this text number 22. I did all of text 23, and then I did voice to text for 24 and 25, but it came out and 26, but it came out so mumbled and jumbled that I'll have to spend time to actually, whatever. Turi Zahav and Magin Avraham, these are sort of the classic commentators on the Shulḥan Arukh. Rabbi David Alevi Siegel, his Taz, he quotes Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, that even if you say that fruits and cheeses require eating, drinking wine is also, and he quotes, okay, this is important for us, drinking wine is also a casual act of consumption. So Rabbi Siegel here is quoting Taz, quoting his father, quoting the Torah, quoting his father, which, as we all know, ultimately gets into the Shulḥan Arukh. Now he says, he starts to really poke at this. He says it's inferable that even if one set oneself to drink wine, they are exempt from having to drink it within a sukkah. But this Ashiri glosses, it's these early Rishonim. He wrote, however, drinking wine, mead, and beer. Now, Chana, you asked earlier about other beverages. So far, we have only discussed so far tonight 2 beverages, wine and water. Everybody knows at this point, water is totally fine outside of the sukkah. Wine at this point is somewhat debatable. And now he's also mentioning, what about mead? What about beer? These are things that people drink. This is being quoted in the Haggadah Ashiri, however, drinking wine, mead, and beer with fruits or whatever. This is a little, I wasn't really sure about the Hebrew here. All these things. But bread and its company, I'm not going to get into all this. But maybe there's no drinking without eating, or maybe there are times when he eats all this stuff, but drinking. His point is, does one always drink on its own, or do you need to have eating going on? It's also important that he mentions these other beverages. He quotes Rabbi Mordechai ben Avraham Yafi, wrote his Lavush, upon wine drinking, one who drinks to quench his thirst, but if establishing to drink a lot is in a fixed manner, you could have a lot. You could sit down to drink. Is it maybe now a quantity issue? Because, I'm not sure, he doesn't really get into it, but I'm going to throw this in to our heads, which is, just as we saw within the Talmudic stuff, with the Mishnah and so forth, with foods, that there's a quantity aspect, a quantitative aspect, that if you have less than a kibetza, less than an egg's worth of bread, which normally does require a sukkah, then you don't. That's casual eating. But more than that quantity, it triggers the necessity to eat. Maybe wine also has a quantitative aspect as well. Is quantity an aspect, not just the category of beverage? Previously we were talking about wine, water. What about mead, beer? Where do they fit in? Maybe it's a quantity piece to it. Those are not the only desiderata. He says, therefore, it seems that it's also fixed for a sukkah, requires consumption within a sukkah. Meaning, if you have a lot of wine, maybe you have a volume question, a quantitative aspect that triggers the necessity to drink within a sukkah. He says it's good to act stringently here. With regards to the blessing, it seems that one needs to bless upon fixed drinking of wine, since from the statutory obligation, one should bless each and every time. Now he's quoting the Gaonim, except that they fix it to only bless upon eating. Now he's the first to mention, does this now trigger a blessing? Once we already say wine drinking, especially in a fixed fashion, requires within a sukkah, maybe it also now triggers Leishiv Sukkah. Now there's the bracha question. To me, it seems that one should not bless Leishiv Sukkah at all upon drinking, except in a set fashion. You say that, and that was sort of I feel like this is my Python Holy Grail, sort of trailing off at the end. Here at the bottom of the Hebrew, I'm sorry I haven't fully translated this, but he says, what if you're setting yourself lishtok kodam ha'achila, before you start eating, you're going to shtin yayin saraf? What if you're drinking whiskey before you begin your eating? Bim dinos elu, whoever talked about where are they? In our countries. So he's talking about like Franco-German, European stuff. He's like, what about in our countries? We drink whiskey before we start eating, as one does, right? That's right. More bang for your buck. Okay, so right, you're starting off. That's how we do things in our countries. We start off our wheels with whiskey. But he says, look, he says, look, at the end of the Shulḥan Arukh, look, just save the blessing on the drinking for the food. That's just what we do. That's our Ashkenazi custom. We'll keep things simple. But at least he brought in what Lavush mentioned as far as once you have a certain amount, like really is wine always just a casual drinking? Or maybe sometimes we're set. Okay, text 23, I did fully translate this.
Even if he said to drink wine, there was no established aspect in this time, as it was written in 174. And according to what was established there in 213, that setting requires consumption within a sukkah, and similarly,
has Rabbi Mordechai ben Avraham Yaffe written in his Lavush. In the language of the Rabbi Yel ben Samuel Tzirkis in his new house, an individual person who sits to drink does not consider it to be an actual set drinking, but a group of folks who get together to sit down to drink is considered fully established, and specifically in a place that they are accustomed to drink together in a set fashion without eating, that would be fully established and requires consumption within a sukkah and to bless Lishab Basukkah. That's now how the Halakhah seems to me, but practically it is appropriate to act strictly, not to drink in a fixed fashion, except within a meal, in order to remove ourselves from a disagreement.
There's a lot to digest here. So one thing he mentioned is, well, yeah, maybe, I mean, we've had all these different things. Well, what if it's a quantitative amount, or what if it's a category, or what type of beverage? But what if it's, or we've even talked about geographical, but what if it's, well, yeah, it's yourself, you're having wine by yourself, just as one does, but when you're getting together with a group of people to drink wine, especially in a place that you're normally used to drinking wine together, as we are doing, maybe that is kovea. Versus, yeah, I'm just having wine by myself. That's not, that you can get away with outside your sukkah. But you're getting together with a bunch of people to drink wine together. That's going to trigger. That's a certain sense of kaviyut, of establishing. That's going to require sukkah now.
Be drinking with the guys.
That's what it says in the text.
That's right. You're drinking with the guys. Yeah, it's how we should translate b'nei chavurah. Is drinking with the guys. Drinking with the guys.
Hanging with the guys.
Yeah. By the way, there's
Bourbon and cigars can only be with the guys.
all right. There's actually a whole series of Braitot in Arvei Pesachim that talk about people in a b'nei chavurah. There's drinking parties. That's what they're doing. There's like 3 or 4 Braitot in Arvei Pesachim that all are talking b'nei chavurah. You're getting together for drinking parties. Like that's literally what's happening in Talmudic times, and still to this day. Like people get together to drink. And this is the case with setting for other beverages, inferring explicitly that one should not bless when drinking without establishing oneself. Meaning, when he says other beverages, he's talking about beer, he's talking about whiskey, he's talking about mead. This is not exclusive to wine. So he's saying if you're having a drinking gathering, it doesn't have to only be wine. It could be beer, it could be whiskey, it could be mead, it could be cider. You know what? These are fixed drinking gatherings. These should probably be actually in a sukkah. This probably requires sukkah, although, blessing, maybe not. And then he quotes these other rabbis that he mentions. They also agree. When you're having these established drinking sessions, even non-wine beverages, that's going to trigger the necessity to do so within a sukkah.
Hey there, I wanted to break in yet again. Although I asked for support in financial ways because it does cost some money to make the hosting happen and other aspects of Jewish drinking happen. So your financial support is definitely appreciated. And don't forget, you can go to jewishdrinking.com/donate. But also, another way of supporting the show and everything that Jewish Drinking does is also to tell your friends, tell your neighbors. If you like this content, if you like this show, maybe people also like it. So feel free to let them know, hey, I have this interesting episode I heard, or a few episodes, or whatever it is, or even a few clips. Feel free to share with your friends. All right, thank you so much. Now back into the show.
We have Aruch HaShulḥan. We also have Mishnah Berurah. I'm not going to go through everything here. So I'm going to skip down to paragraph 10. So he says, in the middle of the paragraph, he says, Shtias Yain. Okay, what about wine drinking? Nami Tami Dercha Raihu. He says, yeah, wine drinking is always a casual manner. Therefore, you're always permitted to drink wine outside of the sukkah. Uvizman HaGemara, in Talmudic times, but Talmudic times, they always sat down to drink. This was a set affair to drink wine. It was not in a casual manner. That's not how we do it in our European late 19th century times. But anybody who establishes and really sets, that is considered a set manner, and sukkah is required. The final paragraph for those following at home in the Hebrew, Rabbi Shulḥan Arukh. So they basically opine that, well, I'm not going to all the food stuff, but he says, look, yesh migdolim shepak mekuzeh. There was some really back and forth amongst the major folks. He says, Yesh mi shikasav d'zeh rak beinu levein atzo. all this stuff, especially with wine, that's only by yourself. He says, Aval b'chavura, when you're drinking in a group, yesh kvius l'shtiyah. There is a set aspect to drinking in a group together. He says, ben yain, ben sha'ari mashkin. Doesn't matter. Wine, whiskey, gin, other beverages, you're getting together in a drinking gathering, that's going to trigger a sukkah. So, and he's actually quoting the Bach and Magen Avraham. So he's quoting text 23, and I didn't include the Bach here, but okay. So, aval lo yivarcho zeli she'b'sukkah. But you shouldn't make this blessing. Lefin minhagena, because we have this Ashkenazi minhag, not to do so. She'ein mevarchin rak b'shas suda. Only with these 5 grains. He says, he says, there's even someone who is concerned. What about even as an individual? You're not even in a group. You're just drinking by yourself. Maybe even drinking by yourself can trigger drinking within a sukkah. It doesn't matter as long as it's not fruit or water. Even on your own, that might trigger sukkah consumption. Mihu bikfius b'chavura. However, then this is really important. When you are having a set drinking session in a group, yeah, you definitely have to. You really should practically be stringent and do your drinking in a sukkah. Maybe it was just a tour of HaShulḥan Arukh, just them. They're only talking about individuals, not when you're in a group drinking setting. In a group drinking setting, that's going to trigger sukkah consumption.
Why hasn't anyone said like
That's a great
you
question.
can drink less than a ribby wherever you want of anything?
X25 or 26 actually. His contemporary who passed away just 90 years ago, Rabbi a fellow Kohen. So he has 2 texts here. He has text 25 but text 26 also. Text 26 is way more fascinating, but I'm going to mention text 25 here. So Mishnah Berurah, he says the reason that it's all about this arrive. The casual eating versus the fixed eating. What the Ramah writes that even if you affix yourself is even on the wine, just we saw in Darkei Moshe, which I did not read his Darkei Moshe. He says, look, you should know that there are many post-Shulḥan Arukh rabbis who really debated this matter regarding the wine. And they said that if you're drinking the wine in a fixed manner, you really should be doing that in a sukkah. That really triggers the necessity to drink the wine within a sukkah. And very specifically, the B'nai Chabura, the drinking session people, you're having a drinking session with a bunch of other people, that really triggers the necessity to drink wine. That is Heve Keva Gamur. That is really full-on fixed drinking. That actually triggers the sukkah. He says, Mikol makom, nevertheless, Le'inyan bracha hiskimu kama acharonim de'in levarach le'shei b'sukkah. He says, even though, he says, there are many post-Shulḥan Arukh rabbis who said, you don't need to say, you do not need to say the blessing. He's not saying all, right? There are still plenty, as we've read, plenty of post-Shulḥan Arukh rabbis who said, not only do you need to have this within a sukkah, you should be saying the blessing in the sukkah. He's like, well, you know what? There's been most post-Shulḥan Arukh rabbis who said, even though the chabura, the drinking session, does trigger the session to be held within a sukkah, does not trigger the necessity to say the blessing. That's the Mishnah Berurah. But he goes more in depth. This is our final text of the night. So text 26, this is really where he goes in depth into this whole wine issue. Because really, he is focusing on this one word, inclusion in the Shulchan Aruch, wine. That wine can be a casual drink. He says, look, he says, yeah, look at the Mishnah Berurah, what I wrote there, that even if you said, okay, so far. I'm going to summarize those both opinions. They bring this Talmudic thing from Brachos 36b that we say explicitly for Birchas Hamazon, that if your people are setting their meal upon wine, even if you were to do so, that's sort of an exceptional, you're not normal. Now, some of this actually brings in Rava stuff, right? Rava is there in Brachot talking about, I would have set my meals upon wine, but he's sort of an outlier. He says, this is also Hu'adin La'inyan Sukkah. This is also regarding Sukkah. The proof is that they provide their, I'm not going to go into it, wine without eating. That's no one actually drinks without eating. And he provides this proof that we saw in the Hagos Ashiri. Trying to bring these different textual proofs. He says, now I'm going to explain those who disagree. And Okay, so di hakinami divnei chabura. So what about people getting together to drink? That they came together to drink wine, that they would be permitted to bless Birchas Hamazon through just having gotten together to drink wine.
Which means wine is a meal.
Yeah, that you can set your consumption upon that. Now I'm going to explain those who disagree upon it. Now this is the proofs that they provide. Now what I mentioned earlier, they can even prove the opposite way. And I mentioned earlier, okay, so now I'm going to provide a really huge support to their position. What's in 28b, we saw that in text 7 and 8 in our session. Right? These are the primary activities that you do in a sukkah. You're eating, you're drinking, that these three activities are the primary activities that we carry out in the sukkah: eating, drinking, sleeping. Mashma Damad Amar Rabban Gamliel in Talisha Maim Halum L'Sukkah. So what we saw in the Mishnah with Rabban Gamliel, that's just a chumrah. He didn't need to have those. V'al kain sham mayri le'inyan yain dechav shivi. And what about wine? This is a really important line. He says, look, Rambam, he said, yeah, you can drink wine outside of the sukkah. He didn't mention wine. This is not a careless act of Rambam to forget to mention wine. He's saying, Rambam was very clear, wine's not included in this, even though the Shulḥan Arukh is included. Masasi be'ezras Hashem litana gadol. So this is sort of, we're bringing it home now. He says, look, I'm going to find a really big support. Kivreha v'hua ritva. So Rabbi Yotov Elishvili, the Chidushav in his novella, Dekasa v'hedja lishdias yain revis chashiv keva. That's exactly right. So once you have a quarter log, which is like 3.5 ounces of wine, now this is going to be sort of mirroring what the Gemara talks about, or maybe the Mishnah, about once you have a kibetza, an egg's volume's worth of bread, that triggers the sukkah necessity and that's no longer casual. What about a quarter log, a few ounces worth? Once you have a few ounces of wine, maybe this is a quantitative aspect too. That under a few ounces of wine, that's not enough to trigger the necessity of the sukkah. But once you have more than a volume of that, according to the Rifa, maybe this is a quantitative aspect. He says, "Ve'ein derech lishtot yain b'kvius chutz the beito." So this. We're getting into the final line, which is really fascinating. He's bringing this line we saw from the Tannaitic material that you should dwell within your sukkah just as you typically live, and it's not the way ve'ein derech lishtot yain b'kvius chutz the beito. How often do we drink wine outside of our houses?
All the time.
Well, do you? Usually we drink inside our houses.
Or somebody else's house.
Oh, okay, outside, not
Yeah.
someone else's.
No.
No, it's just like out and about. Like, it's maybe one thing to have like beer out and about just in a casual fashion, but wine, you're going to sit down, you're going to have wine. That's different than certainly water or maybe other beverages, but wine has a certain setness to it. Al kain chai b'sukkah kain nirali nachon be'ezras Hashem. So even here, so this is the further in-depth writing of Rabbi Kagan, who says, you know what? Even wine drinking, even perhaps in all the B'nai Chabura stuff, fine. B'nai Chabura, yeah, but even maybe on an individual level, wine, do we usually have just like casually outside of the house? No, we usually have it within our house in a set fashion. So maybe that's really something that should be appropriate to take place in our house.
What's wrong with regular wine? People don't want regular wine.
Yeah.
Like it tasted better.
Right. I mean, we would say coffee is something we drink casually, but I don't know. I would say coffee we drink casually wherever, but I don't know. Whiskey, I don't know. It's debatable. Beer we drink wherever. Who cares? Yeah.
It is a casual outdoor drink.
I think most of us would.
You can totally.
I think we would drink beer casually wherever, but wine is more set.
Is there a final halachic discourse like we're saying?
So
if you're gonna drink wine as a group, you should be the sukkah.
So from what I've seen here, I didn't look at anything else beyond these. It seems to be that in our situation, getting together over drinks, like that should take place in a sukkah. Probably more so over wine, maybe over beer or whiskey, maybe less so.
Certainly,
Um,
we have all three.
Right, certainly, but it's interesting. We had some definitely, but the post Shulḥan Arukh Aharonim, there are some who even though it didn't seem to be amongst the Rishonim, they were talking about the blessing aspect. There were a couple of those post Shulḥan Aharonim that were talking about maybe we should be saying a blessing when we're having a wine drinking session, that we should be saying in Leisheh B'Sukkah. This seems to be a minority opinion, but at the same time, it's not altogether pushed out. I mean, they're just holding on to the Ashkenazi custom. We should eat. Now, at the same time, I don't know that I included it here or it's in the Aruch HaShulḥan. Someone said it. I don't think I read it out. They said the easiest, just make it simple for everybody. Just when you're having a drinking session with a bunch of people, have mazonos. Just make it simple for everybody. You get yourself what?
That's Rabbi Scroll.
And look,
Always says,
right.
bring a cookie with you to
Right.
Abdullah. Bring a cookie with you.
Right.
Always bring them.
Right. And actually, that's one thing I did not include. One thing I did not include here. The Mishnah Berurah talks about doing Havdalah in the sukkah. So, because you're going to have a reviz of wine, right? You're having a reviz of wine. You should do it in the sukkah. And so,
It's an excuse to eat cake.
yes. So maybe you say Leisheh on the Havdalah also, and then you just have some mazonos. Yeah, you just get yourself. They talk about getting yourself out of the all the debates and stuff. Just have some mazonos, make it easy, and continue your drinking.
Speaking of bringing
So with that, I want to say l'chaim. So.
L'chaim.